The wind didn't howl. It screamed. It was a sound from a world gone mad, a razor's edge of ice that scoured the fledgling town of Bitter Creek, Wyoming. Elias Blackwood, the town's self-appointed mayor and saloon owner, had called it the White Death. It was a name that stuck, for the cold was not merely weather. It was a pestilence. Kaya watched it from the small, single window of her cabin, her breath frosting the glass. At 30, she had seen hardship, but this was different. This was an ending. The snow had fallen for 3 days without cease, piling into drifts that swallowed porches and buried the main street. Then the temperature plummeted, turning the air to shards of glass in the lungs. Her cabin, once a refuge, was now a freezing tomb. The fire in the hearth fought a losing battle, its heat stolen by the relentless drafts. She pulled the buffalo hide tighter around her shoulders, her fingers numb. She was a practical woman, a seamstress who had come west seeking a quiet life after a past she never discussed. Now, that quiet was filled with the town's dying moans. A sudden, frantic pounding on her door made her jump. She rushed to open it, the frozen hinges protesting. A figure, shrouded in ice and snow, stumbled inside, collapsing on her floor. It was Elias Blackwood, his fine suit hidden beneath layers of furs, his face a mask of blue-tinged terror. "They're gone, Miss Kaya," he gasped, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. "The Henderson boys?" Frozen solid in their bunkhouse. Old man Peters found him on the privy. His eyes were wide. "We have to get to the saloon. It's the only building with a big enough stove. We'll pool our warmth." Kaya helped him to his feet, her own heart a cold, heavy stone. "Everyone? Everyone who's left. A dozen, maybe. The rest." He didn't need to finish. The White Death was claiming Bitter Creek. Soul by soul. As they trudged through the chest-deep snow, the wind tried to peel the skin from their faces. The world was a monochrome nightmare of white and gray. They passed the blacksmith's shop, a silent, snow-filled cave. They passed the general store, its windows opaque with frost. Death was everywhere, silent and absolute. The bitter saloon was a cacophony of despair. The pot-bellied stove in the center glowed cherry red, but its heat was a feeble joke against the cold that seeped through the walls. The remaining townsfolk, miners, a few shopkeepers, a soiled dove named Lila huddled around it, their faces gaunt with fear and exhaustion. The air smelled of wet wool, unwashed bodies, and despair. Kaya found a spot near the edge of the group, her eyes scanning the desperate faces. It was then she noticed his absence. The one man who was always on the periphery, watching, silent. "Where is Nahuel?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elias Blackwood spat into the sawdust near the stove. "The Apache? Probably holed up in his shack. Let him freeze. He's got his savage ways. We have civilization." He gestured vaguely at the stove, but Kaya's thoughts were already far from the saloon. Nahuel, the quiet Apache man who lived in a wickiup on the edge of town. He was a tracker, a man of the land, who traded furs for bullets and kept to himself. Most of the town feared or despised him. But Kaya had seen something else. She had traded with him, shared quiet nods, and once, when a drunken cowboy had gotten too handsy, it was now all silent, imposing presence that had made the man back away. There was a deep, resonant strength in him that the townsfolk, in their arrogance, mistook for savagery. As the night deepened, so did the cold. The saloon's piano was silent, the whiskey did little to warm, and the hope in the room was dying as surely as the people outside. Kaya looked at the faces around her, blue-lipped and hollow-eyed. Elias's plan of pooling warmth was a failure. They were just dying together. She thought of Nahuel, alone in his wickiup. Was he warm? Did his people have secrets for a cold like this? Secrets the civilized world had forgotten? A resolve, cold and sharp, settled in her gut. Staying here was death. Elias Blackwood's civilization was a thin veneer that the White Death had scraped away, revealing the weak. Terrified creatures beneath. Leaning close to Lila, she whispered, "I'm not dying in this saloon." The woman looked at her with pity. "There's nowhere else to go, honey." "This is it." Kaya pulled the buffalo hide tight. "There is," she said, her voice firm. "There has to be." She moved towards the saloon doors, her steps deliberate. "Where do you think you're going?" Elias barked, his voice cracking with panic. "To find a different kind of fire," Kaya replied. And before her courage could fail, she pushed open the doors and stepped back into the screaming hell of the storm. The saloon, for all its despair, had been a pocket of relative warmth. Outside, the cold was a physical assault, stealing her breath and searing her lungs. She was a fool. She was going to die. But she would die moving, seeking, not waiting. Through the blinding white, she fixed her eyes on the dark outline of the foothills, where she knew Nahuel made his home. The saloon doors swung shut behind Kaya, muffling the sounds of despair and cutting her off from the last vestiges of communal warmth. The impact of the cold was so violent it stole her breath. It was like plunging into a frozen river. The wind ripped at her buffalo hide, seeking entry. And the driven snow felt like needles against any exposed skin. She had taken only 10 steps, before her legs burned with the effort of pushing through the deep drifts. The world had shrunk to a radius of a few feet, a swirling vortex of white. The main street of Bitter Creek was gone, its landmarks buried. She navigated by memory and a desperate, gut-deep sense of direction towards the foothills. "This is madness," a voice screamed in her head. "Turn back. The saloon is death, but it is a slower death. This is suicide." But the image of Nahuel's calm, weathered face steadied her. He was a man who moved with the land, not against it. While the townsfolk cursed the cold, he would understand it. He would have a strategy for it. It was a hope so fragile she dared not examine it too closely, for fear it would shatter. Her progress was agonizingly slow. The wind changed direction capriciously, sometimes pushing at her back, more often slamming into her face, forcing her to turn her head just to breathe. Her skirts were a frozen, heavy trap. Once, she stumbled into a hidden trough, plunging into snow up to her neck. For a terrifying moment, she flailed, disoriented and trapped. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She was going to die here, buried in white, just another anonymous victim of the White Death. With a guttural cry, she fought her way out, her muscles screaming. She lay panting on the surface, her body trembling not just from cold, but from sheer terror. She couldn't go back. The saloon was now a distant, unreachable dream. Her only choice was forward, or to simply lie down and let the snow cover her. She pushed herself up, forcing her numb legs to move. One step, then another. She became a machine of pure will, her mind focused only on the next footfall. It felt like hours, but could only have been 40 minutes before the terrain began to slope upwards. The flat of the town was behind her. She was on the path to the foothills. The snow was deeper here, less trampled, but the wind was partially broken by the rise of the land, and then she saw it. A faint orange glow. Not the roaring, wasteful blaze of a saloon stove, but a soft, contained luminescence emanating from a low, dome-shaped structure half buried in the hillside. A wickiup, its hide coverings banked with snow for insulation. Nahuel's home. A sob, half of relief, half of exhaustion, caught in her throat. She stumbled the last few yards, her body giving out just as she reached the hide flap that served as a door. She didn't have the strength to call out. She simply collapsed against it. The flap was pulled inward from within. Kaya fell forward, out of the killing cold and into another world. The air inside was thick, warm and smelled of sage, smoked leather, and slow-cooked meat. The change was so abrupt it was disorienting. After the sensory assault of the storm, the Wikiup's interior was a sanctuary of profound silence and stillness. A small, carefully managed fire glowed in a central pit, its smoke rising through a cleverly designed hole in the roof. The light it cast danced on beautifully tanned hides lining the walls and on bunches of drying herbs hanging from the frame. And there he was, Nahuel. He was crouched by the fire. Not startled, but watching her with those dark, impossibly deep eyes that seemed to see everything. He was a man in his late 30s, his face a roadmap of a life lived hard and close to the earth. He wore simple buckskin trousers and a shirt, and his long, black hair was tied back. For a long moment, he just looked at her, lying half-frozen on the earth floor. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of assessment and quiet curiosity. "Kaya," he said finally. His voice was low and calm, a rumble that was the complete antithesis of the screaming wind outside. She could only nod, her teeth chattering too violently to form words. He moved with an economy of motion that was both graceful and efficient. He did not rush to her side with exclamations of shock. Instead, he rose, fetched a thick, beautifully beaver-pelt blanket, and draped it over her shivering form. Then he went to a clay pot sitting near the fire and ladled some dark liquid into a cup. "Sit up," he instructed, his tone not unkind but firm. She managed to push herself into a sitting position, the buffalo hide falling away. He handed her the cup. It was bitter, earthy tea, but it sent a wave of warmth radiating from her core out to her frozen extremities. "You left the town," he stated. It wasn't a question. "They are dying," she whispered, her voice raw. "Elias, the saloon. It's not enough." Nahuel nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to the hide flap as if he could see through it to the dying town below. "The people have a name for a cold that kills. We call it the breath of the ice giant. It is not a thing to fight with iron and loud voices. It is a thing to outsmart, to respect." He turned his dark eyes back to her. "Why did you come here?" The question hung in the warm air. She had asked herself the same thing on her desperate trek. Was it just survival? Or was it something more? "Because I knew you would not be dying," she said simply. "And I did not want to die." A flicker of something approval perhaps crossed his face. He studied her for another long moment, his eyes taking in her ice-crusted hair, her wind-burned face, the determination that still flickered in her eyes despite her ordeal. "The cold has its fingers in you," he said. "Not deep, but they are there. Your spirit is still strong, but your body is failing." He gestured to the fire. "Stay close. The tea will help. We must get the shivering to stop." He moved to the entrance and began rearranging the hides, sealing them even more tightly against the storm. Kaya watched him, sipping the life-giving tea, feeling the dreadful, penetrating cold slowly recede from her bones. She was safe. For now, but as she looked at Nahuel's powerful, silent form moving in the firelight, a new thought occurred to her. She had escaped the dying town, but what had she come to? She was in the lodge of a man she barely knew, a man the rest of the town feared. The storm still raged outside, and she was utterly dependent on his skills. His mercy dot she had traded one kind of uncertainty for another, far more potent one. The shivering finally subsided, replaced by a deep, weary warmth that seeped into Kaya's marrow. The Wikiup was a cocoon, a pocket of defiant life in a frozen world. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was a shared space, filled only by the soft crackle of the fire and the distant, muffled shriek of the wind. Nahuel returned to his place by the fire, his movements fluid and silent. He picked up a piece of deer antler and a small, sharp knife, resuming the work she had interrupted. He was carving, his focus absolute. "You are not like the others in Bitter Creek," he said without looking up. His statement was neutral, an observation of fact. Kaya wrapped the beaver pelt tighter. "I keep to myself." He glanced at her, his eyes reflecting the flames. "You are a woman who sees. The others, they look, but they do not see. They saw a savage when they looked at me. What did you see?" The question was direct, unsettling in its simplicity. She thought of their interactions over the past year, brief, respectful exchanges at the trading post, the silent understanding in his eyes when he saw the bruises on her wrist from the drunken cowboy. "I saw a man who knows the land," she said carefully. "A man who is contained." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. Contained. It is a good word. The white man builds big houses with many rooms, yet his spirit is loud and spills out, vulnerable to the world. My people build a home that is one room, but our spirits are contained, protected. He gestured around the wickiup. This is strong because it bends with the wind, it does not fight. The cold cannot find a hold. He put down his carving. The breath of the ice giant steals the warmth from inside you. It is a thief. You cannot build a big fire to scare it away. It will only laugh and steal that heat too. You must keep your fire small, close to your heart. He tapped his chest. "The people in the saloon?" Kaya began, a pang of guilt twisting in her gut. "They are trying to warm the air around them," Nahuel said, a note of what might have been pity in his voice. "It is a battle they will lose. Their bodies will burn through their own life fire trying to heat the great emptiness of that building. They will be exhausted, and then the cold will take them." The grim finality of his words settled over Kaya. She had felt it, the way the heat from the stove was instantly swallowed by the void. "Is there nothing that can be done for them?" Nahuel was silent for a long time. To save them, they would have to unlearn the world they know. They would have to listen to the man they call savage. "Elias Blackwood would rather freeze than hear my words." He looked at her intently. "But you listened. You saw. And you walked through the breath of the ice giant to get here. That is a story few can tell." He rose and went to a parfleche, a painted rawhide bag, and pulled out a piece of dried meat. He handed it to her. "Eat, slowly. Your body needs fuel for its inner fire." As she ate the tough, salty venison, he began to speak again, his voice a low, rhythmic storytelling cadence. "My grandfather told me of a time when the ice giant breathed upon our village long ago. It was a cold that could crack stone. The wise chief did not tell the people to build bigger fires. He told them to come together, family by family, into the smallest lodges. They banked the hides with snow. They shared their body warmth. They ate the fat of the buffalo to stoke the fires inside their bellies. They told stories to keep their spirits strong. They did not fight the giant. They made themselves so small and quiet that the giant's breath passed over them, not finding them worthy of his attention." He looked at the hide wall as if seeing the storm outside with different eyes. "That is what we must do. We must make ourselves small. We must be unworthy of the giant's notice." Kaya finished the meat, feeling strength return to her limbs. The story was not just a tale. It was a manual for survival. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait," Nahuel said. "The giant will breathe for as long as he wishes. Our task is to be patient, to conserve, to be still." His eyes met hers, and in their dark depths she saw not just survival, but a deep, abiding connection to the world that both nurtured and threatened. And to trust each other. The word trust hung in the air. It was the unspoken contract of their situation. She had to trust him with her life. He had to trust her with his sanctuary. "The man who bothered you," Nahuel said, changing the subject with a jarring suddenness that told Kaya he had been thinking about it all along. "He is in the saloon?" Kaya nodded, a cold knot forming in her stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. His name is Jericho. He's a miner. He will not bother you again, Nahuel said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. It was not a threat, but a statement of fact, as immutable as the mountains. A strange sense of safety, more profound than any she had ever felt, washed over her. It was not the false safety of locked doors, but the primal safety of being under the protection of someone truly powerful. She looked at this man, this savage, who understood the poetry of the storm and the science of survival, who offered shelter without question and protection without being asked in the space of a few hours. The entire world had been inverted. The town, with its laws and its stoves, was the place of chaos and death. This simple, primitive lodge was the fortress of order and life. The wind screamed its frustration outside, but inside there was only the quiet crackle of the fire and the slow, steady rhythm of their breathing. The ice giant was raging, but for the first time since the snows began, Kaya felt not just hope, but the first, faint stirrings of something else, something that felt dangerously like a beginning. The night wore on, a timeless stretch measured not by clocks, but by the gradual consumption of the firewood, and the subtle shifts in the storm's voice. Kaya dozed fitfully, wrapped in the beaver pelt, drifting in the warm, herb-scented space between exhaustion and alertness. Each time she opened her eyes, Nahuel was there, awake, vigilant. He would add a single piece of wood to the fire, or sip his tea, or simply sit in a cross-legged meditation. His presence a steady anchor in the chaos. During one of these wakeful periods, he spoke, his voice a soft rumble that seemed part of the fire's song. "The giant is growing tired," he said. "His breath is not so strong. He has spent his anger on the town below. By the morning, he will be sleeping." "Morning?" Kaya whispered, the concept feeling alien. "How can you tell?" Nahuel gestured with his chin towards the sealed entrance. "The sound. Before it was a scream. Now it is a moan. The pitch has changed. The wind is looking for new places to torment. It has given up here." Kaya listened. He was right. The unrelenting shriek had diminished to a lower, gusting howl. It was a small change, but to a man who listened to the land as others listened to conversation, it was a definitive shift. "You speak of the storm as if it's alive," she said. Nahuel looked at her, his face serious. "Is it not? It is born from the clash of sky and earth. It lives its life, fierce and short. It feeds on the warmth of the world, and when it is full, it dies. Is that not a life?" He paused. "Your people see the world as a thing to be used. A rock is just a rock. A river is just water. This is why you are surprised when the rock falls or the river floods. You are not listening." Kaya thought of Elias Blackwood, of the miners blasting into the hillsides, of the farmers plowing the earth without thanks. Nahuel was right. They were not listeners. They were conquerors. And now the conquered was fighting back. "The town." She began, but the question died on her lips. She already knew the answer. Nahuel's expression was grim. "We will see when the giant sleeps." As the first gray light of a bleak dawn began to filter through the smoke hole, the wind finally fell silent. The sudden quiet was as shocking as the storm's first scream had been. It was a heavy, profound silence, broken only by the occasional groan of a snow-laden branch. Nahuel moved to the entrance and carefully pulled the hide flap aside. A wall of pristine white greeted them, but the sky above was a flat, light gray. The killing cold remained, but the murderous wind was gone. "It is time," Nahuel said. He began pulling on heavier outer garments of wolf fur and lacing up high fur-lined moccasins. "Time for what?" Kaya asked, getting to her feet, her body stiff. "To see," he replied, "and to help if there is anything left to help." The simple statement struck her to her core. After everything, after the town's scorn and bigotry, his first thought was to see if he could help. Her own thoughts had been of survival, of guilt, but not of active aid. In that moment, she felt the vast gulf between his wisdom and her own. He handed her a pair of similar moccasins and a second wolf fur coat. "Put these on. Your town clothes are not enough." Dressed in the warm, supple furs, she felt armored. They pushed through the snow that had sealed the entrance and emerged into a world transformed. Bitter Creek was a series of soft white mounds under a blanket of snow 3 feet deep. The air was so cold it was painful to breathe, but it was still. Eerily still, they moved down the hill, their progress slow but steady in the fresh snow. The first mound they passed was the blacksmith's shop. Nahuel stopped, using a long stick he had brought to probe the snow near the door. He hit something solid. He dug for a moment, clearing away the powder to reveal a frozen blue hand clutching a bottle of whiskey. Kaya turned away, her stomach clenching. They moved on, a somber procession of 2. They found others. A miner frozen in a running position, forever trapped in a desperate sprint for shelter that never came. The sight was horrifying, a gallery of statues depicting the final moments of panic. Finally, they reached the bitter saloon. The doors were frozen shut. Nahuel put his shoulder to them and with a crack of splintering ice, forced them open. The scene inside was one of pathetic, collective demise. The stove was cold, a heap of gray ashes. The townsfolk were huddled together in a semicircle around it, as if in worship. They were all dead. Their faces were peaceful in a way, the terror of the final moments frozen into a waxy mask. Elias Blackwood was at the center, his eyes wide open, staring at the dead stove with a look of profound betrayal. Lila, the soiled dove, was curled in a ball at the edge of the group, a small, lonely figure. Kaya felt a tear freeze on her cheek. She had sat with this woman just hours before. Then, a low moan. It came from a dark corner, away from the main group. Nahuel was there in an instant, Kaya close behind. Curled in a ball, shivering violently, was Jericho, the miner who had harassed her. He was alive, but barely. His lips were blue, his skin gray. He looked up, his eyes glazed with cold and fear. He saw Kaya, recognition dawning. Then his eyes shifted to Nahuel, towering over him in his wolf furs, a figure of immense power and vitality amidst the death. "Demon," Jericho rasped, his voice a dry leaf rustle. Nahuel knelt, his face impassive. He uncorked a small skin of liquid, the same bitter tea he had given Kaya, and held it to the man's lips. "Drink," Nahuel commanded. Jericho flinched away, terrified. "Poison." "It is life," Nahuel said, his voice low and firm. "Your choice is to take it or to join them." He gestured to the frozen circle around the stove. Trembling, defeated, Jericho allowed Nahuel to trickle the warm liquid into his mouth. He coughed, sputtered, then drank greedily. Nahuel looked at Kaya. He has strength left. His hate kept his fire burning a little longer than the others. There was no judgment in his voice, only observation. He then did something that sealed Nahuel's character in Kaya's mind forever. He began to unbutton his own wolf fur coat. "What are you doing?" Kaya asked. "He will die if we move him now. His body cannot make its own heat anymore." Nahuel stripped off the heavy outer coat, then his shirt, revealing a torso of hard, scarred muscle. He gestured for Kaya to help him. Take off his frozen clothes. Working together, they stripped Jericho of his ice-stiffened garments. Then, following an ancient ritual of survival, Nahuel lay down beside the near-naked, shivering man and pulled him close, sharing the vital heat of his own body. Covering them both with the wolf fur coat. Kaya watched, stunned. This man, whom Jericho had called a demon, was now giving him the breath from his own lungs, the warmth from his own heart. To save a life that had shown him nothing but contempt died in the deathly quiet of the saloon. Surrounded by the frozen evidence of a failed civilization, Kaya witnessed a different kind of power. It was not the power to take, but the power to give. It was the heart of the mountain, strong, enduring, and when necessary, merciful. And she knew, with a certainty that eclipsed the cold, that she had followed the right path out of the storm. Time stretched in the frozen saloon. Kaya kept watch, adding a few pieces of wood from a hidden stash Nahuel had pointed out to a small fire she built in the cold stove. More for light than heat. The main source of warmth in the room was the profound, life-giving transfer happening under the wolf fur coat. She watched Nahuel, his eyes closed, his breathing steady and controlled as he focused on channeling his own vitality into the man beside him. There was no revulsion on his face, no resentment, only a deep, focused purpose. This was not about Jericho the individual. It was about the sacredness of a life, any life, in the face of the void. After what felt like an hour, a healthy flush began to return to Jericho's skin. The violent shivering subsided into a gentle tremor and then ceased. He slipped into a deep natural sleep. Nahuel carefully extracted himself, his skin covered in goosebumps in the frigid air. He quickly pulled his shirt and coat back on. "He will live," Nahuel said, his breath pluming in the air. "His fire is lit again." Kaya could only nod, her throat tight with an emotion she couldn't name. Awe, perhaps, and a dawning, painful understanding of her own past prejudices. She had never been as openly hostile as the others, but she had still viewed Nahuel as other. Now, she saw he was more fundamentally human than any of the men now frozen around them. "We cannot stay here," Nahuel said, his gaze sweeping over the macabre scene. "The dead need to be left to the snow. It is their shroud now. We must take the living and go." "Go where?" Kaya asked. "Back to your wickiup?" Nahuel shook his head. "It is safe for two. For three, and for the work that must be done, we need a different place. A place the ice giant cannot find." He looked towards the mountains, their peaks hidden in the low gray cloud. "There is a cave. A place my people used in the worst winters. It is a heart of stone, always warm. The work?" Kaya asked. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of deep personal concern in his eyes. "The giant may sleep, but he will wake again. This is not over. The cave is a journey. We must prepare." He set her to work with a quiet authority. They scavenged the silent town. It was grim, ghastly work, moving through the frozen tableaus of final moments. But Nahuel did it with a reverent efficiency, never disturbing the dead more than necessary. From the general store, they took sacks of beans, cornmeal, and salt. From a collapsed lean-to, Nahuel retrieved snowshoes he had crafted and left to trade. From various cabins, he collected every fur hide, wool blanket, and candle he could find. Kaya followed his lead, her practicality making her an able assistant. She found a medical kit, needles and thread, and a small cast iron pot. They worked in silence, their breath pluming, building a small stockpile in the center of the main street. Jericho woke, confused and weak, but alive. He looked at Nahuel with a bewildered fear, but said nothing. When Nahuel handed him a pair of snowshoes and gestured for him to carry a sack of beans, he complied without a word, the fight utterly gone from him. Finally, Nahuel led them to the livery. The horses were all dead, frozen in their stalls. But in a back room, they found what he was looking for, a large, flat-bottomed sled used for hauling timber. He loaded their supplies onto the sled and fashioned a harness from rope. "The way is uphill." We will all pull." And so they left Bitter Creek. They did not look back. The town was a grave, and the living had no business there any more. They moved in a single file, Nahuel in front, breaking the trail with his powerful legs and the snowshoes. Then Kaya, then Jericho, all tethered to the sled, pulling their survival behind them. The journey into the foothills was arduous. The snow was deep, the air thin and biting. But with the snowshoes, it was possible. Nahuel set a slow, relentless pace, one designed to conserve energy rather than cover ground quickly. He was still listening, still managing their inner fire's dot as they climbed higher. The world changed again. The trees were thicker, their boughs bent low with snow, creating a cathedral-like silence. The path Nahuel followed was invisible to Kaya, but he moved with unerring confidence. Just as the gray light of day began to fade, he stopped before a wall of granite and tangled evergreen bushes. He brushed away snow from the base of the rock, revealing a dark, narrow opening just large enough for a person to crawl through. "This is the place," he said. He went first, disappearing into the darkness. A moment later, a soft glow emanated from within. He had lit a prepared torch. "Come," his voice echoed from inside. Kaya crawled in, followed hesitantly by Jericho. She stood up inside and caught her breath. It was not a dark, damp hole. It was a cavern, large enough to stand in comfortably, with a high, domed ceiling. The air was noticeably warmer, carrying a faint, mineral scent. At the far end, a small, natural chimney in the rock promised ventilation for a fire. A stack of dry firewood, prepared long ago, lay against one wall. A stack of furs was beside it. It was a pre-prepared sanctuary, a secret gift from the land itself. Known only to those who listened, Nahuel was already building a small, efficient fire in a stone ring in the center of the cave. The flames caught, illuminating the smooth stone walls. Dancing in the safe, enclosed space, Jericho collapsed onto a pile of furs, exhausted, and was immediately asleep. Kaya stood watching Nahuel, the firelight playing on his profile. He had not just saved her life. He had saved Jericho's. He had led them from death through the frozen wilderness and into this hidden heart of the mountain. He looked up at her. And in the quiet of the cave, with the storm vanquished outside, the unspoken thing that had been growing between them since she stumbled into his wickiup finally filled the space. As warm and real as the fire, the town of Bitter Creek was ashes. But here, in the heart of the mountain, something new was waiting to be born. The cave was a world unto itself, a sanctuary of stone and fire. With the entrance partially obscured by the evergreen bushes, it felt secret, safe. The temperature was stable, just cool enough to be comfortable with the small fire, a stark contrast to the killing freeze outside. For 2 days, they lived in a quiet, focused routine. Jericho slept for most of the first day, his body and spirit healing from the ordeal. When he was awake, he was quiet, his former bluster replaced by a watchful, almost fearful silence. He watched Nahuel with the awe of one who has been saved by a force of nature. Nahuel was a quiet storm of activity. He ensured the fire was perfectly managed. He prepared meals, a thin, nourishing stew from the beans and venison. He showed Kaya how to render the fat from a piece of dried buffalo hump to make pemmican, a dense, high-energy food. Every action had a purpose. Every resource was treated with reverence. Kaya found a strange peace in the work. Her life in Bitter Creek had been one of quiet loneliness, mending the clothes and hiding from the attentions of men like Jericho. Here, she was an essential part of a small, surviving unit. Her hands, skilled with a needle, were just as skilled at preparing food or sorting supplies. She and Nahuel worked together in a seamless, wordless dance. On the second evening, Jericho was well enough to sit by the fire and eat on his own. After the meal, he looked at Nahuel, his gaze steady. "Why?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The single word carried the weight of all his confusion and shame. "Why did you save me, after what I was?" Nahuel finished cleaning the wooden bowl he was holding. He did not look up immediately. "A man is not one thing," he said finally, his voice low. "You were a man who did a foolish thing in a saloon. That is one part of you. In the storm, you were a man who fought to live. That is another part. I did not save the foolish man in the saloon. I saved the man who fought to live." He looked at Jericho, his eyes holding no forgiveness because there was no judgment to forgive. There was only truth. What you do with the life that was given back to you is your story to write now. Jericho absorbed this, his head bowed. He nodded slowly, then retreated to his bed of furs, leaving Kaya and Nahuel alone by the fire. The silence that fell between them was different now. It was charged, filled with the things that had been building since Kaya had first seen the glow of his wickiup. The shared ordeal, the intimacy of this hidden cave, the raw stripping away of civilization's pretenses, it had all carved a space for something true. Kaya broke the silence, her voice soft. "You speak of stories. What is your story, Nahuel? Why are you alone?" Nahuel poked at the fire, sending a shower of sparks up towards the stone chimney. "My people are gone," he said, the words simple but freighted with a bottomless grief. "The coughing sickness took them. 2 winters passed. I was away hunting. I returned to a silent village." He was silent for a long moment, the memory of fresh wound in the firelight. "I stayed for a time, but the silence was too loud. So I went to the edge of the white man's town to listen to a different kind of noise." Kaya's heart ached for him. She understood loss. It was what had driven her west, away from the memories of a life that had ended too soon. "I am sorry." He nodded, accepting her sympathy. "It is the way of the world. Life. Death. The wind does not apologize for blowing." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "And you, Kaya? What story did you leave behind?" It was a question no one in Bitter Creek had ever asked with genuine interest. She took a breath, the words feeling strange on her tongue. "I was married. His name was Thomas. A good man. A carpenter. Cholera took him in St. Louis. There was nothing for me there after that. Just ghosts. So I came west, to a place with no memories." She had never spoken of it so plainly. In the town, she was just the seamstress, the quiet widow. Here, in the heart of the mountain, her truth was safe. "Our stories are not so different," Nahuel said. "We are both people who walk with ghosts." Their eyes met across the fire, and the understanding was complete. They were 2 survivors, their pasts burned away by different kinds of fire, left with only the essential core of who they were. Later, as Kaya lay in her bed of furs, she heard Nahuel get up for his final check of the fire. She feigned sleep. She felt him pause beside her. He did not touch her, but she felt his presence like a physical warmth. He stood there for a long suspended moment, and she knew he was looking at her. Then he moved away, back to his own bed. The next morning, Jericho was the first to speak. "The storm is over," he said, looking towards the cave entrance where a bright, clear light was filtering through the bushes. I think I should go. See if anyone else made it." It was a flimsy excuse, and they all knew it. He was giving them space. He was also, Kaya realized, beginning to write his new story. He could not do it in the shadow of the man who had saved him. Nahuel nodded. "Take food. Take the snowshoes. The way down will be easier." An hour later, Jericho was ready. He stood at the cave entrance, awkward in his borrowed furs. He looked at Nahuel, then at Kaya. "Thank you," he said to Nahuel, the words heartfelt. "For my life, Then he turned to Kaya. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for my past behavior." Kaya simply nodded. Forgiveness was a complex thing, but in the face of such profound change, it felt possible. Then he was gone, crawling out into the bright, frozen world, leaving them in the warm, silent cave. The absence of a third person made the space feel both larger and more intimate. The unspoken thing was now the only thing in the room. Kaya busied herself with tidying the supplies, her heart pounding. Nahuel stood by the fire watching her. Finally, he spoke. "Kaya," she turned to face him. "The world out there," he said, gesturing towards the entrance, "it is broken. Bitter Creek is gone. The old ways are gone. But here," he looked around the cave, then back at her, his dark eyes blazing with a fierce, quiet light. "Here, we can make something new, if you wish it." He did not move towards her. He offered the choice, freely, completely. Kaya looked at this man, this listener, this warrior, this savior. He had not just saved her from the cold. He had shown her a way to live in harmony with a world she had always feared. He had seen her strength when she had only seen her survival. She walked to him, stopping an arm's length away. The heat from the fire was nothing compared to the heat she felt radiating from him. "I don't want to go back to the silence," she whispered. That was all the answer he needed. He closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to cradle her face. His touch was not tentative, but sure, as sure as his steps through the storm. His thumb brushed her cheek, a gesture of profound tenderness that shattered the last of her defenses. When his lips met hers, it was not a kiss of passion alone, though that was there, a banked fire suddenly roaring to life. It was a kiss of promise, a vow made in a cave, sealed by fire and survival, a new story beginning where the old one had ended. It was the answer to the storm, a declaration of life in the kingdom of death. The world outside the cave began to thaw. The relentless grip of the white death loosened, replaced by the steady drip-drip of melting snow and the occasional thunderous crash of a snowslide from the high peaks. The air lost its knife's edge, carrying instead the clean, wet scent of pine and earth. In the cave, a new life took root. The space that had been a shelter became a home. Kaya and Nahuel fell into a rhythm that was both practical and deeply intimate. Days were spent on necessary tasks, checking snares Nahuel set for small game, collecting fresh water from a meltwater stream that now gurgled past the cave mouth, expanding the supply of firewood. Evenings were spent by the fire, talking, or often, in a comfortable silence that was richer than any conversation Kaya had ever known. He taught her the language of the land, how to read the tracks of a deer, which plants held medicine, how to listen for the subtle shift in wind that foretold a change in weather. She, in turn, taught him the things from her world, the stories she remembered from books, the songs her mother had sung. They were building a shared culture, a tapestry woven from both their pasts. Weeks turned into a month. One morning, Nahuel announced they would go down to the valley. "It is time to see what is left, and to let the world know we are here." The journey down was a revelation. The deep, impassable snows had retreated, revealing a world washed clean. The skeletons of Bitter Creek emerged from the melting white, the stark, gray bones of buildings, the rusting stovepipe of the saloon poking through the mud. It was a ghost town, silent and empty. They found Jericho there. He had built a lean-to against the still-standing wall of the livery. He looked healthier, stronger, his eyes clear. He had buried the dead, a series of simple wooden crosses and stone cairns on a hill overlooking the town. "Saw a few others first week after the thaw," he told them, leaning on a shovel. "Drifters mostly. Passed through, saw what happened, moved on. Place is cursed," they said. He looked around, his expression resigned. Maybe they're right. He had decided to stay, he explained. Not in the town itself, but nearby. Gonna try my hand at trapping. The mountains owe me, I figure. He looked at Nahuel, a look of respect passing between them. There were no more words needed. As they turned to leave the desolate scene, Jericho called out, If you're settling somewhere up there, he gestured towards the foothills, I'd be obliged if you'd let me know where. For trading. And, well, in case you need an extra hand. It was an olive branch, an acknowledgement of a new community, however small. Nahuel nodded. We will be at the mouth of the Spruce Canyon. You will be welcome. They left the Valley of Death behind them, climbing back into the living mountains. Nahuel led her not back to the cave, but to a new place, a sun-drenched meadow nestled high in a canyon, sheltered by towering spruce trees. A creek, swollen with snowmelt, ran through it. This is the place, Nahuel said, his voice full of a quiet pride. The soil is good. The water is sweet. The sun finds it early and stays late. He had been preparing it. Stacked near a stand of trees were logs, stripped of their bark, waiting to be raised into walls. It was to be their home. The work began that very day. Kaya worked alongside him, her hands growing calloused and strong. She learned to use an axe, to notch a log, to mix the mud and grass for chinking. They built not a wickiup and not a town cabin, but a hybrid, a sturdy log home with a central fire pit, its design borrowing from both their worlds. It was a symbol of their union. One evening, as the skeleton of their house stood dark against a sky ablaze with sunset, Kaya stood with Nahuel looking out over their meadow. The air was warm, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers. The memory of the cold was a distant nightmare. The ice giant took a town, Nahuel said softly, his arm around her shoulders. But it gave us a world. Kaya leaned into his strength, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart against her back. She looked at the home they were building, at the land that would feed them, at the man who had taught her how to live. I have no regrets, she whispered. He turned her to face him. In his eyes, she saw the reflection of the fiery sky and her own face, filled with a peace she had never thought possible. The past is a story we have already lived, he said. This, he gestured to the meadow, the half-built house, the two of them, this is the story we tell now. He knelt by the creek and picked up a handful of wet, dark soil. He held it out to her. She took it, the earth cool and rich in her palm. It was a promise, a beginning. When the snow melted, it did not just reveal the dead. It revealed the possibility of new life. In the high meadow, under the endless western sky, two people who had been saved from the cold by the warmth they found in each other began their story anew. It was a story of listening, of respect, and of a love that was as enduring and unyielding as the mountains themselves. And it was only the first page.